For the very first time ever in CSI, we've got a special session whereby we are doing an interview with someone who's very important in our lives for various reasons, maybe from a personal reason, but actually for every single person in this room, certainly for a professional reason. So I know there are young people in here, so if you were born after 1975, could you put up your hand, please? Lucy? Oh, you're much older than I thought you were then. Okay, and anybody born in 1975? Anybody here born? Ah, there we are, fantastic. Which month? November, okay. Little bit too young. Well, anyway, many of us in this room have given talks on ASD closure. Put your hand up if you've given a talk at any level, whether national, international, local, on ASDs. Shaq, I know you have, okay. Well, almost certainly in your talk, you will have referenced the work of our guest today, and that is Dr. Terry King, who in 1975, along with his colleague Noel Mills, a surgeon, performed the very first, not the first, the very first ASD closure in a young lady who is still doing very well today. So we're going to bring that gentleman here, and Terry King, please come forward. Terry, here he is here. Terry's...
We would estimate that the...
So welcome, Terry. That was a clip. Thank you very much for joining us. This is a very important occasion for all of us here, and many of the people who are performing ASD closures have heard of your name, but haven't really met you. So it's an honor for us here, this conference, for you to be here, and welcome to Frankfurt.
Thank you, Shaq. It's indeed an honor for us to be here. And Noel would love to be here also. So I'll say thank you for him also. Thank you.
Okay. So Terry, a few easy questions and then a few slightly difficult ones. So one easy question is, are you willing to give us or share with us your year of birth?
Share what?
Your year of birth, the year you were born in.
Of course I am. I'm very young. I was born in 1938.
Did anything happen around the world around that year at all, apart from your birth?
Well, other than I was born, are you talking about that, Shaq? Yes, of course there was. It was the end of the Depression, and it was just prior to the start of World War II, and I can still vividly remember the early 40s as a young child and what the whole world was going through.
Terry, that's terrific. So you were sort of born at a time of fruition, really. Your mum and dad, brothers and sisters, what did they do?
Well, I had one brother. We were middle class. I actually grew up on a ranch in the South Plains of Texas. We didn't, because of the end of the Depression and World War II, we didn't have a car. We walked everywhere. And I made money by digging post holes at the ranch so I could buy a bike. So it was austere in those days. It was austere. So we were hard workers. My parents were wonderful parents, encouraged me to get an education. I was the only one in the family at that time on my father's side that had a degree or ended up with a degree. So I had an extremely good work ethic given to me by my father. What little intelligence I had, I think, comes from my mother.
Well, no doubt women play a huge role in our lives, more than maybe we're willing to admit sometimes. So you were the one and only doctor really in your family.
That's correct.
So where did you go to medical school, or whatever you might call it in the US?
Actually went to the University of Texas. Went to University of Texas as an undergraduate, ran track at the University of Texas, and then ultimately went to the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas. We call it the Harvard of the South. It's the oldest medical school in Texas, so we had to make something up there.
So in the medical school, Terry, I mean, I used to fail all my exams. Were you a hard worker, passing all the exams, top of the class, or?
I was a very hard worker. I did graduate pretty high in the class, and I love to do things like study the notes from the previous year, so when I started the new year, I seemed even smarter than I really was.
But Terry, there was something quite extraordinary about your medical school days, your time to graduation. Would you like to share that with the audience? Most of us went to medical school 5, 6 years. Terry,
well,
go on.
Being poor, having a family, I needed to get to medical school as quickly as possible. And at the University of Texas, they had a program where if you qualified, you could go through medical school in 2 years and 9 months. And I was fortunate to qualify for that.
So what got you into pediatric interventions then?
Well, I got into cardiology, and I think this is a very interesting story. I went to medical school after studying for my master's in entomology. For those of you that don't know what that means insects. I loved insects. And a professor, when I was studying my master's, got me interested by showing me a film of an English surgeon working on the heart-lung machine, and encouraged me to go to medical school. So when I went to medical school, I had to have a job. I was working in the cotton fields in the summers prior to that, and I had the good fortune to meeting a physician by the name of Leonard Harris, who was from Pretoria, South Africa, trained at Great Ormond Street, and he gave me a job in the pediatric cath lab, and I was so impressed with his clinical acumen and his down-to-earth approach to medicine that I soon learned that surgery was not for me, but pediatric cardiology was. And that's how I got into pediatric cardiology, because of Dr. Leonard Harris.
So was there any specific training that you went through during that early phase when you're trying to work out what to do with pediatric interventions?
I was just in medical school, Shaq, and trying to get through as quickly as I could. So I continued to be very interested in pediatric cardiology, so even though I was not in official training, I did everything I could with Dr. Harris to advance that opportunity.
So in that early period, until you got into pediatric cardiology interventions, were there any events that left a really long-lasting impression that changed your thinking, your lifestyle in relation to your medical career?
In terms of going into medicine? Yeah, there was a real paradigm shift, because I was, at age 8, I thought about medicine and then got away from that and thought about entomology because I worked with my uncle in Shreveport, Louisiana. But I think that your career is often modified by people who are smarter than you are, who care more about your career than you may think that you do. And I had two people, Dr. Harris and Dr. Leonard Harrison. And then the chairman said to me when I graduated and finished my internship, you don't need to stay in Texas, Terry, you need to go off. So there were two people that really were monumental in changing my career. And then Dr. Dashner arranged for me to interview at UNC and Duke, at Hopkins, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and Boston Children's. So these people were so instrumental in guiding my career, Jack.
Dr. Harris was clearly an inspiration to you.
Absolutely.
Who are your other mentors throughout your professional life?
Well, I would be very remiss not to mention Madison Spock, who was chief of cardiology at Duke. And I went there with the thought of just being a cardiologist, and he showed me the world of research. It changed my whole perspective of medicine. I've always loved patients. I've loved the world of medicine, but he showed me another side of medicine that I was not familiar with, being a country boy, no shoes, etc. He gave me insight to the bigger world.
Your first pair of shoes, did he?
Yeah, helped me.
So, Terry, before getting into pediatric cardiology, I think your career digressed a little bit, did it not?
Yeah, you're talking about in being in entomology? Yes.
No, there was Air Force.
Oh, yes. It was the Vietnam era, and so every physician and physically able had to serve in the armed forces. So I volunteered early to be in the Air Force. And so when I graduated, I was a major. They gave me credit for all those years of training. So it made more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I thought I died and gone to heaven. And I was stationed at Lackland Air Force Base, which is the Air Force Mecca. It's a huge medical facility. And we got heart casts from all over the world from the armed forces. One of which came from Wiesbaden, Germany, which played a monumental role later on in my decisions.
Wiesbaden, which is just down the road here, of course.
Yes.
And there are doctors here from Wiesbaden at the conference. So let's just digress a little bit from... Oshak, are you going to...
No, let me ask a bit more. So, did you stay in Air Force for how long?
I was there for 2 years. I really loved the Air Force. It was wonderful. The resources were unlimited at Wilford Hall, unlimited. And if I'd have stayed re-upped, I would have been a light colonel. But there was an event in that time that changed my final decision about the armed forces and allowed me to go into semi-academics and private practice.
Well, you were disciplined because you went to the rank of major, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
Were you a disciplined sort of person or a Hawkeye type of person in MASH?
No, Southern boys tend to be disciplined. They tend to be highly regimented.
Yeah. So sometimes armed forces are glad to get rid of people that are not disciplined. Were you one of those?
No, I was asked to stay.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, after that, once you got into pediatric cardiology, if you could tell us a little bit about the first that you did. Obviously, the ASD closure. But before that, were there any firsts that you had got into?
In terms of first to do something like that, yes. When I was in the Air Force, we were presented with a child from, the parents were in the Air Force, the father was, from Wiesbaden, Germany. The child had hydrocephalus, and he'd been operated on about 4 or 5 days. Post-op, they noticed there was swelling in the child's neck. And on further exploration, the child had a ventriculoatrial shunt, which we don't do anymore, as you know. But the Pudens catheter had embolized to the right ventricle. It had happened 4 times before that I could find in the literature. But a surgeon that was at Wilford Hall also trained at the same time when I was at Duke, and his name was Bob Klein. And he called me,
Bob, the second name again?
Bob Klein.
Klein.
K-L-I-N-E. And in Texas, we snare snakes a lot of times with snare loops and stuff. It's kind of fun to get a big old rattlesnake in a snare. And so he said, he called me and he said, "Terry, do you think you can snare this Pudens catheter?" And I said, "Well, I've never done something like that." And but we took a NIH catheter, cut the end off, and took a guide wire and doubled it up. And actually, it turned out to be pretty easy to snare. The difficulty is that only 1 millimeter, the tip is opaque, so you have to kind of feel for it. It was in the right ventricle. So I put a big loop in the right ventricle and twirled it around, and lo and behold, got lucky and snared it. And that played a role in my future thoughts, because in the late 60s, I thought, why can't we close ASDs? I said, why can't we do that? In my heart, I really knew that I thought that could be done.
What got you thinking about that? Because there was no echo facility available.
Well, Rashkin and Miller in '66 with the balloon septostomy, and then Portsman from Germany with the Avalon plug were doing those procedures. And I thought, I always loved catheterizing. And I thought, it just doesn't make sense that you can't close an atrial septal defect. And actually we thought, and did PDAs and VSDs. Most people don't know that, but we actually did those. When I was interviewing towards the end of my Air Force stay, and up to that point, everybody I asked, could you close an ASD during cardiac catheterization? The universal answer was no. It can't be done. And of course, heart-lung had just come in since the mid-50s, strong. And it was sort of heresy to even be talking like this. So during one of my interviews, I was asked to come to the Ochsner Clinic. And that's where the other half got involved. And I met him. He's a country boy like I am. He's from Mississippi. He likes to catch alligators. He's a country type person, but he was a brilliant surgeon. And I asked him...
let me just... Catch alligators?
Yes.
Why?
Well, the snare probably, was it?
Well, they do snare them, but they would catch them and turn them out in places and kind of scare the populace. You know, it was kind of a joke.
Seems a weird hobby to have, isn't it?
Well,
catching alligators.
Things at times are pretty weird in the South, too. So when I was interviewing, I asked him, I said, what do you think about closing cardiac defects during cardiac catheterization? And to my utter amazement, Noel jumped up and ran over to a drawer and pulled out a handful of catheters with rubber disc on the end. And he said, well, he was up at NYU in New York City. He said, I've been working on infarct VSDs, and I think it can be done. Well, that was it. I knew where I was going to go. I had a surgeon, because you could never even contemplate doing what we did without surgical backup. They'd probably put you in jail or something, you know. So anyway, that sealed my fate in terms of where I was going to go.
Okay, so let's go in a little bit more into ASD closure then, the very first one. How did you approach it? How did you work out in your head what the size of the ASD was going to be and how you were going to try and close that?
Well, the actual concept of double umbrella occurred to me early one morning. I did not sleep much in those days, and I was thinking, it was early one morning, like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, why can't this be done? And I thought about snares because of being a farm boy. I thought about fish hooks because of being a farm boy. And then I said, what is small enough to pass through a catheter, but once in place, large enough to close a defect? And it dawned on me, umbrellas, just that quick. That was it. So
at 4 o'clock in the morning, when most normal people think of other things or preferably sleeping, you were thinking of how to close ASDs.
That's correct.
That's interesting concept. Okay, keep going.
So I went to Ochsner because Noel Mills said it could be done. And I had an uncle at LSU who was an electrical engineer, and I called him and I said, I need somebody to help me to build tiny devices. He said, well, let me call you back. And a few days later, he called me and said, I have a machinist here. So I went to Baton Rouge. We had 1/2 day a week to do research when I was at Ochsner. So I took Friday because that would give me more time during the weekend if I needed it. And I met with him in the Student Union building on the LSU campus, and on a napkin, which I regrettably did not save, I drew out a crude sketch of the cardiac umbrellas. And I asked him, did he think he could do this? And he said, yes. So every Friday afternoon, I drove to Baton Rouge, Louisiana from New Orleans, Louisiana, and went into a basement, and he and I would work on a machine we had in a big magnifying glass, and designed the first devices in the bottom of a engineering building on the LSU campus. And of course, Noel Mills had a lot to do with that, because we didn't have the metals we have today. Metals with memory had stainless steel and Dacron, so that's what we used. So Noel had a tremendous input into that. And then to develop the model, Noel was instrumental. I'd done a lot of dog surgery at Duke with Madison Spock, surface mapping and other stuff, things like that. So Noel taught me how to punch ASDs with trocars, and I'd go at noon and punch the ASDs, because we were clinicians. So I'd punch them at the ASDs at noon, and I'd go back to the clinic and work. And then at night, once the dogs were recovered, we would go into the cath lab. We did not have a research cath lab. We would go into the human cath lab, usually between the hours of 11 and 12 midnight. And sometimes it was fun, because we had the dogs anesthetized with various medicines, and they'd be howling when we go down the hall or something like that. It was a little embarrassing at times, but usually we were late enough at night. We didn't encounter anything. So we worked on the devices, we developed the model, and we had lots of failures, of course. And then we gradually improved the device, and it was interesting, because I went there in early September, to the Oxnard Clinic in 72. And on December the 16th, 1972, 3 months or so later, we closed the first dog in the cath lab. So it didn't take that long. Of course, the devices were very crude.
Sorry, Terry, just
when you did
microphone.
the first one, hold the microphone a bit nearer to you.
Okay.
When you did the first ASD closure in a human, not dog, how did you know what you were doing? Very quickly, in terms of where the device was, what landmarks?
We, of course, developed a sizing technique, which we reported using Fogarty catheters. We didn't have these nice, beautiful catheters you have today. We used Fogarty catheters. Had a medical student doing hundreds of measurements at every tenth of a millimeter inflation of the balloon. And then I would wedge the balloons in the defect and do an RAO projection. And if the balloon overlay, it was hypate, 50% hypate field. If it overlay the aorta, I knew that it was primarily centrally located. Of course, primums were out of the question, or partial anomalies were out of the question. And then certainly we didn't know about rims like we do today. We certainly looked at the size of the left atrium. We would do injections to give us some feel. But a lot of it was knowing where the ASD was, knowing the size, and then trying to use a 2-to-1 ratio, hoping it was not too big. That was the intent. It turns out, and John Cheatham pointed this out to me when I was at PICS, this past PICS, the ratios turned out to be, for the first 5, was 1.4.
Okay.
So we were not close to 2-to-1, so we were lucky, to say the least.
Yeah. How many did you do altogether?
We did 5. We were successful. The first 5 in a row were just very successful. Then I got a little more liberal, if we would say. Had a doctor's wife come from Nebraska, and he just begged me to do it. And I knew the ASD was probably too big. And I said, well, I'm sure we're going to have to do this surgically. He said, well, just try. And the last 2, the umbrella slipped over in the right atrium. The device was not self-centering and was not retractable. That was the 2 major flaws with the device. It's a beautiful device. It has low profile. It was easy to put in. But that was the major defects.
Yeah. Okay.
That's fascinating, the 4 o'clock in the morning things. There's somebody in the audience that was awake at 4 o'clock this morning, but he wasn't thinking about ASD closure. Now then, very important, behind every great man, there's usually an even greater woman.
That's true.
And your lovely wife, Nancy's in the audience. Are you still there, Nancy? Yep. Where and how did you meet Nancy?
Well, Nancy, when she was born, she was going to be a nurse, and she knew that early on. So she became a nurse, and I didn't remember this. I met her when she was a nursing student. I was lecturing to a group of nurses. And later on, she worked. I did critical care for 3 decades and started in ICU in several places in Louisiana because we didn't have neonatologists at the time. And she came to work in the unit, and that's where I ultimately met her, was in the pediatric intensive care unit, actually in ICU.
And how did you persuade her to marry you?
Well, she told me...
Nancy's a very sensible woman.
She is. This is a personal joke. So I asked her to marry me, and she said I would. She would marry me if I would buy her a double-wide mobile manufactured home. And probably double-wide. Most people probably in Europe are not used to trailers, but those are trailer houses. And of course, I said, I'll be more than happy to buy you a double-wide mobile home if you'll marry me. So she was foolish enough to believe that. She's never gotten it until just recently. I didn't buy her a double-wide. I lied to her. But this has been a personal joke for a long time. And so finally, we have a camp up on a lake not far from our ranch, and we built a home there, and it's a single wide. So I told her, well, I half lied. So you finally got a manufactured home.
It's quite a good dowry, I think.
Yeah.
No diamond ring for Nancy, just a double-wide trailer.
Yes.
Well, more of Nancy a little bit later. You obviously got children and grandchildren.
I do. I have 15 grandchildren. We have them in litters. We have triplet grandsons and twin grandsons.
15 out of from how many children?
Five children. So we have 15 grandchildren. The oldest 2 are 17, and the youngest is 4 years old.
And any of your children or grandchildren in the medical profession of any sort?
I have a daughter that's a speech pathologist. My oldest son contemplated being a physician, and he went to University of Texas, where I went undergraduate, and then later on to Duke, where I was. And he came home one day, and he's from Duke, and he said, "Daddy, would you be upset if I don't become a physician?" And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well, I don't want to live like you live," because I went to work at 4 o'clock most mornings and came home at midnight. And he said, "I don't want to live like that." And I said, "Well, I understand." I said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "Well, I want to be an attorney." And I said, "An attorney?" I said, "What type of attorney?" He said, I'll be a malpractice defense attorney." And I said, I'll accept that. Now, on our ranch, we have cattle and we have big squeeze chutes. And I said to my son, I said, "Brady, you know how we put those bulls into the squeeze chute and we make them neutered? If you become a plaintiff attorney, I'm going to make a eunuch out of you." So he became a very good malpractice defense attorney, and I'm very proud of him.
Well, fantastic. Any other achievements of your children or grandchildren you're particularly proud?
Well,
I'm sure you're proud of all of them, of course,
yes.
but...
Well, yes, I'm truly proud of all of them, and God has been good to me because I should have been a better father at times, which I'm doing a much better job now as a grandfather and father. But anyway, 2 of them, all of them are very important, but 2 of them help us on the ranch a great deal. My middle son and my 5th son. Both are very instrumental in our ranch, and it's a major major effort on the family to run a ranch of this magnitude.
So, Terry, any episodes at home during your childhood that have left a lasting impression on you?
Well, I have to tell you, I remember driving my father when I was a young lad to Houston, Texas. For him, he was being inducted into the Army in World War II. That I've never forgotten that, because I thought I might not ever see him again. Fortunately, the war came to an end, and before he was out in California, and they just came over the loudspeaker and said, "You're discharged." They sent him home. There were thousands of them out in California. So he got to come home. He was a great person and one that had a lot to do with my work ethic.
Mm-hmm. That's obviously left a huge impression from then on, hasn't it?
Yes.
And you still remember all of that?
I do.
Is that what keeps you sort of grounded, if you like?
Well, to some degree, Shaq, but my mother always said to me, remember from whence thy came. And whence I came off of the plains of Texas, off of a ranch. And
No shoes.
No shoes. And I've always remembered that. I've always remembered to not be anything more than you actually are.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. You've got a lot of characteristics, Terry. But what do you think? What do you think are your, let's say, strong characteristics? Do you feel you even got any weaknesses?
Well, I'm human, so of course I have weaknesses. But I think the strong, the good aspects that I hope people would remember me for is that I truly cared about what I was doing, that I loved my patients, that I wanted to make a difference. For example, the ASD device. And there's a long story behind that. And that excellence is something never to be compromised, and every stone should be turned over to make sure that you're doing the very best you can for your patients.
Fantastic. Now, I don't know, many of you have seen these pictures here, quite a lot of them. This one in particular is the Kingsland Ranch, Terry.
Yes.
Now, obviously, Plains of Texas, pediatric cardiology. Tell us about what keeps you busy when you're not busy with everything else that you're busy with.
Well, of course, I grew up on a ranch, so in Texas, that never gets out of your blood. So we started a ranch in Louisiana. We have an 850-acre cattle ranch. We raise naturally raised beef, which means grass grain fed, and have become quite well known in the state. And this year I had the good fortune of being named the Louisiana Cattleman of the Year, which is a rare honor, I think, for doctors to be getting that sort of award. I was telling some stories to Damien and some other doctors about my cattle endeavors, but they're not repeatable up here. And then we had restaurants. We had 3 restaurants. I felt like the restaurants would be an integral part to raising beef. It turns out that that's not so important. The beef can sell itself. So we've sold 2 of them. We're down to 1. And this year our chef was named the best chef in Louisiana just recently. So we're quite proud of that endeavor. I have to really give credit to Nancy because she's much smarter than I am, as you already know. And she has been really, she wants to be a nurse, but I won't let her be a nurse. She runs everything, and she runs our clinic operations too.
So, Terry, quick question. It's a personal one. You've obviously had a very busy life, especially early in your career. Do you think you spent enough time with your children when they were growing up?
Now, I alluded to that, Shaq. I was, I'm not exaggerating, I went to work at 4 o'clock every morning. And I usually came home at midnight, and I was doing research and clinical work, and I had 15 clinics around the state of Louisiana that I went to every month. So I was extremely busy. So I promised myself that when I became a grandfather, I would be a much better father and grandfather, and I really, with Nancy's help, I've really done much better. My children all love me, but I'm sure at times they thought, where was Daddy? And when my twin daughters went to school, I was still at Oxnard. I was traveling all over the world. They had some testing, and one twin daughter drew me in a airplane, stick figure in an airplane. The other one drew me with the briefcase walking out the front door. And I thought, I better go home.
Yep.
So
I know the feeling. I have exactly the same.
That's when I went back to North Louisiana.
What's been your biggest high in your career?
Well, I would have to first say that the biggest high is something that happens every day in my practice, is to have the patients appreciate what we're trying to do. So I put my patients first because I think that's really what I was meant to do, starting way back at age 8. And then if you picked a specific event to single out, I would have to say April the 8th, 1975 was a monumental day in my life.
Yeah. And the biggest low?
I still, fortunately, it doesn't happen very much since I haven't done critical care medicine for a long time. But every now and then you'll still have a pediatric heart patient die, and that's hard. I stay sad for a long time.
And over the years, how long did you stay in close contact with Noel Mills?
We're still in contact. So he's in Mississippi. He lives in Mississippi. He has a home up in Minnesota. He has a farm. He has about an 800-acre farm, and he has up in Minnesota. He builds, when the summer months, he goes up there and he builds violins, and he's gotten quite well known for building violins, and he raises monarch butterflies. I've seen 2 Minnesota LPA, Louisiana Public Broadcasting documentaries on Noel Mills on those endeavors, building violins and raising butterflies.
Extraordinary about the building violins, because another great interventionist, Philip Bonhoeffer, responsible for the melody valve, is a violin builder. Isn't that extraordinary? Who would have thought? There must be some little genetic mix there.
Yeah.
So Terry, we're going to start just winding things up. What's your plans for the future?
Well, I think I'll die at 5 o'clock one day when I'm working, so I don't plan to retire. Oxner Clinic came back and took us under their wing a year ago, and I signed a 10-year contract to help them build some things, and Nancy's integral part of that. So I love what I do, and as long as I'm having fun, and as long as I feel like that I'm doing the best job, not that I can do, but the best job I should be doing, then I will continue to work. When I don't think that's the case, I'll retire.
Right, so you're not saying I'm going to retire in 2 years or 3 years or next year. It's when you yourself, your own inbuilt ethic tells you, I'm not doing it how I should be doing.
Yeah, that's what, when I was doing heart casts, I promised myself if I felt like I was not at the top of my game, I would stop. And then about 10 years ago, I felt like I just wasn't at the top of my game. I stopped. I don't want somebody coming to me and saying, Terry, do you think you ought to retire? I think you ought to tell yourself when you need to retire.
So, Terry, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I think that I would like to be remembered for that I put the patients first, always first. I always wanted to help them. For years, I've practiced as their family doctors. I don't just do cardiology. They call me for so many things. And that's the way it is where we are. We're kind of isolated. And secondly, I would like to believe that I had something to do with education of people. I think the word professor is really very meaningful, that you leave something behind, that you left a footstool for other people to stand on, to improve their lives and improve their abilities to do whatever it is. In medicine, to give better care. If it's in cattle, raising better cattle. And always, I've loved to learn. I've loved knowledge. And I rarely miss these meetings, as you know, because even though I don't do it, I revel in what has occurred over the last 40-something years. And to be around all of this genius is exciting to me. It's just, it's thrilling to see what I've seen this week and at other meetings. It's just so thrilling. I think that keeps you young. It keeps you young.
Very good. Well, there's some very good messages for us all. I'm looking for Denise. She was going to be... Is Denise over there?
Whilst we're doing that, if you had your life all over again, Terry, would you do something different?
No, I think I'm doing what God wanted me to do.
Yep.
I think I'm doing it. Certainly, I've made mistakes, and I'd like to rectify those. But I think that the big picture, I have really no regrets, none.
And political career, do you had some political aspirations? Donald or Hillary?
Well, yes, I've been active in politics either directly or indirectly, and had chances to run for office and even thought about running for governor at one point. But I don't think that I would have ever done near as much to help humanity being.
So it was a good job you didn't get elected as a governor then, isn't
Well,
it?
I never ran. I just thought about it. But yes. it's a
But it
good
went
thing
out
I
of your
didn't.
head very quickly.
Yes.
So, Terry, quick fire questions. Beef or lamb?
Beef.
Sprint or marathon?
So what now?
Sprint or marathon?
Well, marathon.
Wine or beer?
Wine.
Donald or Hillary?
Neither one.
That's probably a good time to stop. So, Terry, it's been absolutely fantastic. It's been a great privilege to know you, and a fantastic treat for us all here to have had the privilege to get you on the stage. But before